My name is Kofi YouTube Videos. This is my cat, Joanne Woodward, and so are most of these. I would really like to talk about Girl Defined, please. Is that okay? Like, for a while. I want to talk about Girl Defined at you for, like, probably at least 2 hours. I hope that sounds fun to you, because it sounds fun to me. So, let's get started with just the absolute basics for now. Hopefully this video will also be, fun and thought-provoking for people who do have a large existing knowledge of Bethany Beal. That is kind of who I want to be in conversation with about this, but I'm deliberately structuring this in such a way as if you somehow clicked on this and do not know who or what a Girl Defined is, I gotcha. Like I said, my name is Kofi YouTube Videos. I am a lesbian, I'm a feminist, I am a deconstructed ex-Christian. And though you might think that most people who want to talk about Girl Defined are deconstructed ex-Christians, even more so than a lot of other fundamentalists who get online attention, Girl Defined gets talked about a lot by people who are not deconstructed former Christians. Assuming you clicked on this video or didn't immediately click away when I said I wanted to talk about Girl Defined, I think most of you probably know who Girl Defined is, whether or not you already know that that's the case. If you've ever seen at least even just the thumbnail of Trixie Mattel reacting to the how to wear makeup in a God-honoring way, you know who Girl Defined is. But you will come away with a more thorough understanding if you stick through whatever the length of this video ends up being. So this video really isn't meant to be like a comprehensive drama ranking of everything that's ever happened with Girl Defined. This video is a very similarly structured cousin to the video that I posted most recently, which was my Alexa Nicholas deep dive / eat predators post-mortem. That video, if you haven't already seen it and you would like to, should be linked in the description below. It's really just me kind of examining my own feelings about Alexa and what she's doing with the movement, and I was approaching that through like a lesbian feminist lens. That's also very much what's going on here, because that's the lens I apply to everything. Also my prism lenses, which is why the reflections in my glasses are weird. I don't know if anybody else thinks they're weird, or I just think they're weird because I look at my videos more than anyone else does. All of this to say, yes, so some people have criticized Girl Defined on very large scales, such as the drag queen Trixie Mattel, who has recorded a famous response video to the how to wear makeup in a God-honoring way tutorial, as well as actually to at least one other Girl Defined video. That's really not what I'm criticizing here when I say I'm gonna be taking a nuanced look at criticisms of Girl Defined. In that particular case, a drag queen doing a performance that is a parody, I don't really care. I also don't think inherently that the KODY reaction video to Girl Defined was bad. I do think, though, that it contributed in a much more real way to this kind of feeling that I have where Bethany Beal, the more kind of outspoken, you'll be able to tell them apart by the time we get there. This feeling that I've had for the last few months that I haven't been able to shake, though, especially since I watched the CONTRAPOINTS video essay where she was talking about, among other things, Chris Chan. I am absolutely not getting into Chris Chan in this video or at all ever on this channel, but that is very much along the same lines as the sensation that I see happening with Bethany Beal. I don't think there's any same level of media frenzy, and I also don't think that these two people are truly comparable other than the kind of rabid anti-fan reactions that I've noticed them both stoking. But videos about Girl Defined seem to tend to do pretty well, and so do videos about that particular and also pretty much anybody else who has been defined by the internet at large as a lol cow. A lol cow is pretty much like somebody whose every move is going to get posted and dissected and torn apart in multi-hour video essays. Who would make such a thing? Reddit threads about like every single story update that they have on their private Instagram account, because people infiltrate, and this like online panopticon that I think is greatly underestimated in terms of how terrified it would make somebody who might be not particularly Bethany Beal, but as I am going to define in this video, a Bethany Beal type. By that, I mean a woman who has had the same kind of beliefs imposed onto her as Bethany Beal both espouses and seems to have been indoctrinated with. Somebody who is in significantly less position of influence than Bethany Beal, although I do think that the internet overstates a bit how much sway and demand and money this woman has. We'll get to it. Basically, the people that Bethany Beal is victimizing through Girl Defined, actually. The people who I'm more concerned with as a result of her rhetoric, but it's still rhetoric that I cannot and will not take in a vacuum. We will be spending a large portion of today's video in the Nuance Corner, a new channel fixture that got installed for the Eat Predators video. We're going to be looking at all of this through my lens as somebody who has deconstructed all of this and who doesn't have a particular amount of faith in Bethany that she also will deconstruct this, but somebody who thinks that she might, and that also a lot of other women who are a lot like her and don't have snark boards about them might eventually one day build a different version of for themselves. I don't think being in a panopticon is helpful to that. And that's what this video is about. This is really an examination of my own feelings, of what I've observed, both in my own kind of thought processes and discomforts with the way that some of the women have been talked about in my time on the Fundie Snark Uncensored Reddit. I will tell you a story about the first and only time I have ever had a comment on Reddit removed by a moderator. I really still don't think that that comment violated subreddit rules, but whatever. And maybe try to find a way to give somebody our empathy without giving them a cover for their actions or excusing the harm that that action has towards other people. This video is largely centered on Bethany Beal, but a lot of these arguments could and will be applied to other women who are popularly mentioned on these Fundie Snark boards. I will introduce you to them as they come up, but even if you don't know who like somebody who comes up is, you should be able to follow this pretty fine because they all are Bethany Beal types, although they all are more like Bethany in that they also have some level of power and influence. Still, with the exception of Lori Alexander, the transformed wife, who has gone pretty viral on Twitter for about as many years as I can remember being aware of her, long before I knew what Fundie Snark was, because people always dunk on the incredibly harmful things that she says. She is a large advocate that there's no such thing as sexual assault within a marriage. She is horrible, like just ontologically evil. Lori Alexander is buddy-buddy with Debbie and Michael Pearl, who have led to multiple instances of child death and countless instances of child abuse due to their child abusing manual to train up a child, and also a book that was actually given to my mother called Created to Be His Helpmeet, which I have read some of and was turning into a feminist reclamation art project and then ran away from home and didn't bring it with me. That book is horrific, and it's much of the same stuff that Lori espouses. We're talking about a softer, more millennial brand of fundamentalism in this video, and it's one that I think you'll be able to recognize pretty quickly as we start moving through this. So the girls defining themselves and others and kind of redefining this brand of fundamentalist Christianity to be less child abuse forward and more like pinks and soft beiges and pastels are Kristen Clark and Bethany Beal. They have more siblings, including younger sisters who started working for the ministry, and older brothers, one of whom seems to be pretty fully estranged. More on that later. But these two older ones are the ones who started it, and they remain primarily the face of it. Kristen is the older of the two, and she's a little bit less bombastic about things. She seems to be less enthusiastic about this whole social media presence element of what they're doing than her sister Bethany is, especially in recent years since her adoption of 2 young Ukrainian boys who she does not allow to speak their native language amongst each other because she and her husband did not learn it. It's bad. I don't have affection in pretty much any form for either of these women. Like I'm taking Bethany to the nuance corner, but I want to make it very clear before we even go anywhere remotely resembling that I do not endorse or co-sign or in any form agree with pretty much any of their actions or the things that they publicly espouse. They both seem to still be and have in the past been extremely, extremely transphobic. On social media and in their podcast, they are weirdly defensive over like using their position as mothers to be just wildly transphobic all the time when it like never even comes up organically. They're just like, you know who I hate? Trans people. It's bad. The argument in this video is in no way don't criticize Bethany Beal or fundamentalists, and it's also not Bethany didn't do anything wrong or leave Bethany alone when she does something wrong. It is very much criticize Bethany Beal for the right things and maybe don't be incredibly weird about it. Maybe don't take joys in like particularly phrasing things in ways that would make someone uncomfortable just because you hate them, even if you do take issue with their actions. In terms of how this shakes out, I actually would say I think Kristen tends to catch a little bit less heat than Bethany, again, because she's just a little bit less bombastic and argumentative about things. I think because she is spending a little bit less time picking fights online than her younger sister, and a little bit more time not reading anything or looking into how people who have been adopted feel about being forcibly separated from their own culture after they were moved to America in the midst of a war. But, you know, that's just speculation. Bethany gets more flack, not just because she's an easier target, but also, as I've kind of implied, she acts up a bit more. We're going to spend some time in the nuance corner later and kind of think about how the way that they were raised in these systems might have victimized them in a way that makes it harder for them to stop perpetuating in their lives. But again, it's not just a blanket pass to perpetuate whatever you want just because you haven't examined it yet, right? I just don't think that the actions come from nowhere. Bethany's most recent acting up has taken a couple of different forms of late, including She Works Smart and The Intimate Wife. She Works Smart is kind of a grift. I don't even think that this account is particularly active anymore. This was a side hustle account that Bethany started where she was telling people how to be their own boss and make passive income and how that was the best way to get rich. And she seemed to be dramatically overinflating the amount of money that she was maybe earning to sell the idea of wealth, to sell people on the idea that they could accumulate their own wealth. This took the form of her selling a course about how to make and sell courses. Her role in this would be that somebody who already had an idea of something that they wanted to teach other people for money would pay her and take their course and then sign up on the same course distribution website, which she wasn't really being upfront about the pyramid shape of this whole thing, because she would have like continued to get a cut of revenue from other people's classes, from what I understand, from what I saw on the Reddit, which like if it's all upfront is fine. Lots of people have commission and referral things, but it does kind of make her pushing you to start a course make sense, right? Around the time that the course on courses was dropping and people were kind of beginning to move on from that, Bethany started to get spicy. I use that word because she uses it a lot. So she started a new account called The Intimate Wife. She was catching flack from people who are both fundamentalist Christians and people who don't obey the don't touch the poop rule of the subreddit. Don't touch the poop rule just means like you're looking, don't go directly interact. That's literally the phrasing that they use, which is like a little bit fucked. Like I don't truly believe that there's anything wrong with being like I would not hesitate to call a lot of these people pieces of shit, but just like casually having a rule that's like these people are poop and don't interact with them. I feel like there are kinder ways to put that. You know, if I was running a subreddit, I would maybe say, look, but don't touch, you know, don't interact, leave them alone. But the poop touching rule is the one on the subreddit, which we're going to be talking about later. So don't worry about it for now. Anyway, her main account, the Bethany Beal or whatever account, kept going in and out of Instagram jail because she had like a bot that was automatically responding, I think, because it was sending links to people who commented on her posts, and she was using that to send them links to a free seminar that was supposed to get people to sign up for the course. Anyway, she keeps going in and out of Instagram jail, either from, you know, being reported or from either from the spam thing or from the content being a little sexual, which I don't truly believe that it's the second one. Like, this is not really that risque for, you know, I mean, it is for fundamentalists, but for like the secular world, for secular Instagram, I don't think that this is getting taken down for being explicit, because it's truly not explicit. So through the Intimate Wife account, and with plenty of promotion on her main account as well, and I think also the She Works Smart one, Bethany takes all of the knowledge that she had accumulated from building her course about how to build courses to build another course, her second course. This course is the Ultimate Sex Guide for Married Christian Women, which is quite a mouthful. But on the Reddit, they quite brilliantly, despite my misgivings with some other things about them, shortened it to the Intercourse, which I find personally delightful and will be using for the remainder of this video to refer to the Ultimate Sex Course for Married Christian Women. We're going to talk more about the Intercourse later in the Nuance Corner. But like, let's keep talking about the Beals first for a little bit more. The Beals have a Nazi in their family tree, like somebody who was in a position of power during World War II, and then that city had to go through something called denazification afterwards. And the Bairds, that's Kristen and Bethany's maiden name, the Baird family is very into that dead relative. Like, go take pictures on your honeymoon next to his grave. Very into that dead relative. Truly bizarre and not behavior I co-sign. Again, don't mistake me for a Beal fan. If the Beal family has 100 critics, I'm one of those critics. If the Beal family has one critic, I am that critic. If the Beal family has 0 critics, I am dead. But they won't ever have 0 critics. They have a lot of critics who go at this a lot more harshly than I do. Another thing that the Girls Defined have been criticized for a lot is their kind of constantly fluctuating views on modesty. So modesty was kind of the bread and butter of Girl Defined for several years. They would do videos about how to, like I said before, wear makeup in a God-honoring way, about how to layer different shirts under your blouse so that you don't show boobs. This all subscribes to a very similar brand of Christianity than I was raised to, where you don't want to be a stumbling block. Young girls, women would be told constantly that, like, if they dressed up in any type of way that accentuated their body, that they would be a stumbling block and causing young men to stumble. It was never ever on the young man to not leer at women. It was on women to cover their bodies appropriately, meaning you can't have any level of cleavage. You gotta wear like a little camisole that comes up to like at least here. I used to always have to wear tank tops under t-shirts, and looking back, I'm like, why? That's so much more laundry. But the idea of Girl Defined was that it was going to be this like ministry for young women, that it would like help them to define their ideal womanhood through the word of God in the Bible, and so obviously this is all very prescriptive. This is to, at the time 20 somethings reading the Bible and then attempting to make judgments based on that about how they should be telling other people to dress and conduct themselves if those other people also want to be godly. I do kind of want to stop for a second and kind of give some working definitions here before we get too in the weeds with a lot of this, just because I know that even though a lot of us ended up in similar places post deconstruction, even a lot of my other friends who were raised religious are a little bit less intuitive about some of this language than I am because of the way that I was raised. So in this context, when they say Girl Defined is a ministry, this means a few things. I get the vibe that what they're picturing is like a big, decentralized, small group of women. They would show up and you would pick like a devotional that you would all be working through together, or maybe one of the women would be giving a little sermon, and then you would do like small group breakout time and talk amongst yourselves. So the way that they talk about it being a ministry, I feel like they are picturing that they're adapting this through giving their little seminars when they record themselves in their car or when they're doing their podcast or their videos, and that people are talking. They sell workbooks and devotionals and PDFs about how to ask questions to your husband. But the reasoning behind using the word ministry compared to like vlog or business, I think comes down to the fact that a lot of Fundie women just kind of aren't encouraged to actually work outside of the house. So not only do you sound more godly and righteous if what you're working on is a ministry than if it's, being an influencer or having a blog, but you also make sure that you're not bucking up against your very pre-assigned gender roles as a fundamentalist woman. This isn't just in terms of the, I think maybe increasingly a little bit less accepted expectation that the Fundie woman will stay at home and not work outside of the house because, economic realities mean that a lot of them do, but it's not the aspirational ones who are posting about their lifestyle on Instagram. Those are usually stay-at-home wives who, before being stay-at-home wives, were stay-at-home daughters. Daughters who were encouraged not to go to college and begin their career, but to stay at home and wait to be married to a man who would take care of them and however many children they have and homeschool. So while not having a job outside of the house isn't usually like an explicit rule, it is very much what is expected of you and what you are expected to expect of your partner. This like future husband, when you grow up as a fundamentalist Christian girl, the way that Bethany and Kristen did and the way that I did, is like somewhere between an imaginary friend and like the monster at the end of the book. Or maybe that one's just if you're a lesbian. My mom, and also I think Kristen and Bethany's mom, or maybe they just also saw this in the same teenager devotional my mom did, wanted me to like write letters to my future husband. And I told her that I had tried a couple of times because I did. I was actually like a really obedient child. So she told me to do that and I did it. And then I was like, well, this is weird because I don't feel like I have anything to talk to this person about. And she was like, well, don't you miss him? And I was like, I can't. I don't know who he is. How could I miss him? And she was like, you should miss him because you're going to be in love with him and you can write to him about that. And I kept thinking, why does this man want to read letters from a 12-year-old girl? So the only letter that I remember actually keeping that I had tried to write was me being like, dear future husband, this is weird. My mom wants me to write letters to you and it feels weird. And I don't really remember what else. But I do remember that after I had run away and already come out as a lesbian, in one of the only FaceTime calls I ever had with my mother, when they were going through my things and trying to decide what to mail to me and what I just didn't want back anymore, she was like, "Do you want this box of letters to your future husband? I haven't read it." Which, like, first of all, I'm sure she did. But second of all, I was like, no, I'm gay. Which, like, I don't know. Maybe she thought that I could convince myself into being straight if I started pretending like I had a boyfriend earlier. I did pretend like I had a boyfriend, though, as like an extended Facebook prank. That's a story for another day. His name was Gerard Emilio. He did not exist. Anyway, though, it's this performance of gender roles, of I'm not actually working outside of the house, I just have a ministry. The other thing I want to call to your attention, though, about Girl Defined being a ministry is who they're ministering to. And you can actually also see this in the ministry of fitness scammer, animal abandoner Brittany Dawn, another person who I do not have affection for, and her conference, She Lives Freed. Girl Defined, She Lives Freed. I'm sure there are other ones, but these are the two that immediately pop out to me. That part isn't just that, you know, being a boss babe makes you less desirable. I think Brittany Dawn knew that she was going to marry a thumb who looked like a cop, or I don't even want to fix that. I think Brittany Dawn knew that she, but I think Brittany Dawn knew that she was gonna just like marry some cop who like looks like a thumb and thinks that her whole boss babe thing works. So in her case, what she's signaling is a little bit less, I am girlish and ready to be married and rescued, and a little bit more, don't worry, I'm only preaching to the women. This is like one of very few positions that are actually available to fundamentalist women, is to be in this role of being a mentor, of mentoring other people. But you, as a woman, as a fundamentalist woman, cannot and are not allowed to even attempt to mentor or preach to a man. Like, these organizations aren't girl and woman specific because of any particular feminist impassionment about being just with other women. It is a very clear signal to those other women and also to men that the fundamentalist women who are running these organizations and businesses know their place. I also want to do another definition just real quick before we keep going of like what I actually mean when I say Fundie or fundamentalist woman. So a fundamentalist Christian is a Christian who is very literal about the Bible. This would be your young earth creationists, you know, people who have no other interpretation for anything other than directly what the Bible says. Adam gave his rib to Eve, so now they don't match on people, which took me forever to learn was not like a true anatomy fact. Even once I knew I wasn't like into the Bible, I was just like, oh, they must have used that Adam and Eve thing to describe where there are a different amount of bones. There's the same amount of bones. Anyway, fundamentalist Christianity has a very specific set of beliefs tied into it because a lot of other denominations of Christianity have like extra Bible works that they reference, and fundamentalist Christianity is like the Bible, the whole Bible, nothing but the Bible. However, in practice, like on the internet and, you know, snark boards, casual conversation amongst even myself and my friends, people who are not quite fundamentalists do get lumped into Fundie a lot, which I think kind of inherently is a slightly different thing. Like, they can be fundamentalist Christians, but they're also often this pink millennial brand of fundamentalism. They're often actually evangelical or charismatic Christians. Bethany and her husband actually are currently attending a Lutheran church, so not strictly fundamentalist. I refer to the way that I grew up as growing up Fundie, but I was technically a non-denominational Christian. We went to a church that wasn't organized with a larger denomination, didn't have like, it was just a guy doing his own thing. Anyway, this means that pretty much anybody who's like an outspoken and conservative, specifically Christian, will get lumped into the fundamentalist category, whether or not they have feelings about that. Some of them really don't like it, but as far as I can tell, like, pretty much anything short of Catholicism, gets you labeled as a Fundie for the purposes of Fundie Snark. And the homeschooling is like not always, but often. It's a very common thought process in these churches that another one of those standard gender roles that Fundie women are expected to uphold is the care and protection of their children, and they tell themselves and each other that that care and protection does not happen in public schools. That if you as a parent have been trusted by God to raise your child, that you are insulting him by sending your child to school to be raised by other people. Kofi lore, since I'm apparently just sprinkling that in all over this video, this is actually how I got fucked out of a high school diploma. So once you get into the second or third generation of like somebody who had been homeschooled and only ever knew being homeschooled because their mom only ever knew being homeschooled, you grow up at a level of like being inside of the church that I think that most people who like got to know an atheist before they were a teenager don't truly understand. Because once you don't have any idea of what else is possible, what else is out there, I think the act of deconstruction is much harder than most people give it credit for, because a lot of people deconstruct from a less intense place than the people who have the most deconstruction work to do have to start from. Because how do you know what else you can be? How do you even know what else is out there? Somebody got to just take that from you. Somebody got to be in charge of making sure that you only ever met other Christians. Lots of homeschooled children will be like, well, I was socialized perfectly fine. And that was not the case for me. I was not well socialized. I left my house to go to church. For several years, I either left my house to go to church, which I would at least have some chance of seeing other people my age at, or I would go with my mom to Walmart, and otherwise I was essentially on house arrest for my entire life. On top of that, the books that I was being provided with to do school weren't accredited in any sort of way. They were genuine indoctrination. They were Christian-based Bible books, Christian-based history books, Christian-based science books, Christian-based Bible books. I think because specifically fundamentalists are like pushing so hard this like version of the world that they want to see, and they're being startlingly successful about it, especially considering, you know, the recent overturning of Roe versus Wade and how screwed we are with the current Supreme Court layout. And just, I don't think that people pushing back against that and criticizing it are wrong at all. Like, I think like the Christianity itself is a position of power and influence and privilege that Christians hold over the rest of society, and especially in America, considering the given political climate, like it's a high tension moment. I do not hold against people who are frustrated by fundamentalists and conservative rhetoric. I said it right that time. But there is kind of just a part of me that always feels like if more people understood that in a lot of cases, especially in religiously motivated homeschooling cases, to graduate from homeschool is kind of like leaving a bunker for the first time. Like you never used to have any ability to leave your house or do what you wanted or see people, and then you do once you're an adult or you ran away. And in a lot of these cases, if they went from stay-at-home daughter to stay-at-home wife to stay-at-home mom homeschooling kids, this cycle just continues and continues before they have a chance to identify it for themselves, which is how you end up with second and third generation fundamentalists and how you end up with people who deconstruct. Because it really did take meeting people who didn't believe in God genuinely for the first time in my teenage years. I did not know anybody who was not a self-described Christian until I started making friends online as a 13-year-old. You don't know that you can deconstruct if you don't know that you have been constructed into something. So the final thing that I want to lay out our working definition of here is just deconstruction in general, right? So deconstruction is the name that has been given to the process of kind of taking apart and re-examining your internal belief systems. Usually, particularly where this comes to your belief or new lack thereof in God, your fear of hell, things like that that are very deeply ingrained into you when you grow up in these systems, and whatever else was in your homeschool Bible class. I, for example, consider myself to have deconstructed. I'm pretty atheist agnostic, but like I said, I was raised religious. I went to church. I didn't just go to church because it was the only way to get out of the house. I genuinely believed in a lot of this stuff for a long time. And even when it stopped quite sinking with me, when I stopped being able to keep internalizing it, I kept trying and I kept praying for it to start working. I kept praying to be like more religious and better at being a Christian. I got baptized for a second time because when I got confirmed, I still didn't feel right. And none of that took. It just didn't work. I'm like gay Teflon. The thing is, deconstruction is a process that can take years or decades or somebody's entire goddamn life. It doesn't always happen in a linear way like most healing, and I do genuinely think that deconstruction is healing. I don't think Christianity in general is inherently traumatic, but I do think that the kind of experience that you would have had with Christianity to need to truly deconstruct it is a kind of trauma. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't even think that everybody who deconstructed ends up not being some form of Christian in the end, potentially. They might find their own version of that belief that works for them. In my case, I really haven't landed on anything comparable, and I think I'm more comforted without it, so I haven't continued searching for it. But lots of people will go through, a partial deconstruction process and realize that they do still genuinely enjoy being a Christian or believe in God, and good for them. That's great. I don't want to spend a bunch of time being like, I promise I'm not being mean to Christians, because I'm probably just going to block anybody from the channel who is like very, very upset with me for talking about my experience having been indoctrinated, because I was indoctrinated. That's not everybody's experience with Christianity, but it was mine, and that's the kind of language that I will be using in this video. So try to be nice in the comments, but also, as much as I'd really like to get to 500 subscribers soon, which seems like it's gonna happen, and that's wild, I am not afraid to hide people from the channel if they come act up in the comments when I'm talking about this. So there will be 500 people, they just won't also be people who are mean to me. Anyway, deconstruction is not a one-to-one, you walk out into the light and realize that you don't believe in God anymore type of thing. It's also not like a spectator sport, which is what I feel like it gets turned into in a lot of the conversations that I've seen as of late around Bethany Beal. So snark boards are weird places. They are certainly not Fundie exclusive. For example, like Craft Snark, or I'm sure dozens of other more niche hobby ones. It's a combination of like being a specific place to discuss members who are in a particular in-group without you yourself being or quite identifying with that in-group. It's kind of like a reverse fan board. Like there's been lots of discussion on like a stan and an anti-stan or whatever. I do think a lot of what I see on snark subreddits I would classify as fan behavior. Watching a new video as soon as it uploads because somebody that you hate uploaded it is fan behavior. So to anybody who's watching because they really hated my Alexa Nicholas video, hi. Colleen Ballinger, for example, has a dedicated snark subreddit. Actually, in terms of like snark subreddits that I've ever spent any time on, I actually do really like some of the moderation rules that they had in place during all of that. They had very strict rules about not calling into question things that the kids were coming forward about, last summer when everybody was talking about their experiences in the group chats, a very hard rule about just not saying people are lying, which then led to a different subreddit. And if you've read my recent community post, you know we're going to talk about that at some point. But Bethany grabbed me a little bit harder this week, and I was already very familiar with the concept of a snark subreddit because I was aware of Fundie Snark Uncensored sooner than I was aware of the Colleen Ballinger snark subreddit. There is also a Duggar-specific snark subreddit. I think the fandom and anti-fandom that popped up around them is kind of where we can trace back the origins of modern-day Fundie Snark too, but it is before my time. So, like, from my understanding, r/Duggar Snark and Free Ginger, which I think was its own website, that's really the granddaddy of what we see today as modern Fundie Snark. I'm criticizing here, though, kind of some things that I've noticed in YouTube coverage of the Girls Defined, and also specifically that subreddit that my comment was recently removed from. So I'm not only talking about Fundie Snark Uncensored, but I am largely talking about Fundie Snark Uncensored just because it's where a lot of these things happen. r/FSU covers a lot of the Girl Defined goings on, as well as I've said earlier, pretty much any kind of conservative Christian influencer or just whoever the person posting screenshotted a mutual on Instagram and decided to put in front of thousands of people to laugh at. That's fine too, I guess. There's a whole tag for it. It's just minor Fundie, and it's people who don't even actually have audiences but are still being mocked, which I feel kind of counterintuits some things about what makes Fundies okay to mock, but also I guess not, because it doesn't say Fundie Influencer Snark Uncensored. It does just say we're here because we want to make fun of fundamentalists. And to be clear, like, I do think that r/FSU has some well-intentioned rules, and that they do really attempt not to be the absolute worst cesspit that they could. Like, I'm here to talk about ethics of snarking, but, like, I truly don't want to make it sound like Fundie Snark Uncensored is equivalent to, like, Kiwi Farms or something when it's not. It is still a weird subreddit with weird vibes that, like, contributes to thought processes in me that I don't want to think about other women. So I have stepped back significantly ever since I got that comment removed. And the more time that I spend outside of participating in that panopticon, because that's what I was referring to earlier, FSU is that internet panopticon for fundies, I stepped back and kind of realized that I'm better off not doing that. I have more room for nuance, more room to not be annoyed at myself for having perpetuated these things before I had deprogrammed them out of myself. I think moderating a snark board would be no fun at all and, like, impossible. But even just as somebody who was participating in it every now and then, ever since I did get that comment removed, I kind of was thinking more and more about whether or not this online panopticon was really something that I wanted to be looking at as frequently as I was. This subreddit is, like, very, very easy to just think a few hours hate scrolling, especially when you're seeing things that so closely mirror, like, things that you grew up with that everybody that you try to talk to about them thinks is crazy. The thing is, though, is that, like, they are being talked about as crazy in this Fundie Snark subreddit because there's, like, a divide. There are some people like me who have histories with either fundamentalist Christianity or, you know, unpacking any level of any kind of religion and seeing traces of that in what's being observed by the fundies. But there's also a distinct, like, press your nose up against the glass and look at these freaks vibe. And when it's being done, this part isn't really about Girl Defined, but when it's being done about, like, big homeschool families that kind of remind me of families that I knew when I was growing up, and it's like, well, it's not really funny that they're being educationally neglected. Like, my educational neglect wasn't funny, no matter how much I spin the whole diploma and community college rejection thing is a joke, but like, it is very, very sad that that is the reality for a lot of people. And it gets kind of just distilled down into, oh, school of the dining room table strikes again. And it's like, why are we proofreading this stranger's engagement post on Facebook just because her mother is like an influencer? Like, to be clear, some of the discussion that happens on Fundie Snark Uncensored is nuanced and thoughtful and coming from at least some place of human empathy, but a lot of it is not, like, at all. Alongside of posts that like very easily and rationally lay out issues with actual things that Bethany Beal has done, actual glorification of their Nazi family member, things like that are side by side with criticisms of her for smiling with her mouth open, which they refer to as her having a gaping maw, and have repeatedly, even long before she started leaning into her spicy era, have tried to associate with being sexual, even though it's just like a big smile. It's just like a lot of bitch eating crackers behavior, which is like, I say that, and now that I hear it out loud, it sounds like they're crackers that eat. But like, it's like when you look at somebody and you hate them so much that you're like, oh my God, look at that bitch standing over there eating crackers. Like, she's not actually really doing anything directly that qualifies them for that kind of criticism, and you're just going to give it to them anyway. That's what a snark form is for. I mean, I was asked when I commented on a post and called it weird, I was asked, do I even know what a snark board is? But I maintain that it's not snarking to post a before and after photo of a woman from before she was married and after she was married and be like, wow, having sex changed the way that she looks and her personality. I don't think that that's snark. And I guess I just have a different definition of snark than a lot of people, because my comment was just like, weird post, OP, and I got jumped on for like tone policing the person who was like just enforcing misogyny onto Bethany for no reason. Like, I think we've jumped the gun on the whole don't tone police people thing, because I think a pretty essential part of feminism is kind of noticing when people are enforcing misogyny and saying, hey, don't do that. That's not tone policing. It's saying, don't be weird. And I tried to be so nice about it. I tried to be so neutral. Like, I just wanted to like dip my pinky in and take a temperature check and see if anybody else was like feeling weird about that post. And I did get like 7 upvotes before it got deleted. But you know what didn't get deleted? The post about Bethany's complexion and coloring changing. That stayed up, because even though they do have rules that are supposed to stop people from making snark comments about people's bodies and body shaming them, they, and I'm not even kidding, they justify those rules, like when they do and do not enforce them, by using a quote from a conservative Supreme Court issue. Like, I think that they think that they're being clever by being like, well, we're just going to use what the fundies think against them. But the quote that they use to rationalize why it's like okay to be so astoundingly mean about a stranger's appearance online sometimes is that actual body shaming is something that they'll know it when they see it. If that doesn't already set off alarm flags for you with what I said earlier about the Supreme Court, this was regarding obscenity. Like, this was something that was used for censorship. This was not a statement of somebody who was being rational and like judging things in a way that was fair. It was like, I'll know what's obscene when I see it. That's like holding a hammer and saying, I'll know a nail when I see it, when it comes from a Republican. I don't know why, if you are like attaching something to every single post that says these people vote in elections, do you? Which, like, yeah, good point. Yeah, but like, you don't, why are you aligning yourself with the Republicans if that's your point? Like, where is any basis to stand on in any of this? they call this woman Bethany Beal, who like they know, and the nickname does technically predate her having been open about this, but I don't think makes it less misogynistic, just makes it slightly less openly cruel, and only to one of them. They differentiated for a very long time between Kristen and Bethany as Crusty and Birthy. Remember, I said earlier, Kristen adopted 2 boys. Kristen had an infertility struggle for many years, and we found out recently, so did Bethany. Bethany suffered from miscarriages and had a really hard time conceiving. And that's like, I already thought that referring to a woman as Birthy was like Handmaid's Tale shit that I didn't want to perpetuate, but I assumed that the subreddit would like immediately drop that once she talked about how hard of a time she had conceiving. And I see it a little bit less, but not never. And it feels bizarre to me that if you can have rules about certain things and you can delete comments that say that a post is weird, you're not going after people who are referring to a woman as Birthy because she had a baby and when her sister couldn't. Just fucked up on so many levels. And again, I do not like Bethany Beal. I don't like that I have to feel bad for her because there are strangers online who are not criticizing her for the right things. But how in the hell is she ever going to listen to anybody who's trying to criticize her in good faith if it's on the same website where people are calling her Birthy? Why would you do that to a woman? Why would you do that to a person? Why are we holding to spineless Republican Supreme Court standards when instead we could just say, hey, actually, maybe there are some pretty clear guidelines on how people should be treated? And also, like, who is gaining anything from that? There are people who have things to gain from seeing people criticize harmful fundamentalist beliefs and traditions and ways of, raising their children or whatever. There's nothing to be gained from seeing somebody say, wow, this woman looks different now that she has lost her virginity. Like, you're not providing anything good to other people who are in the process of deconstructing, who might be on this board, which I know isn't the sole focus of a snark board or whatever, but I think should maybe be a concern in terms of whether or not the conversation you're having is constructive. And I know not everything is meant to be constructive, but I do think that, like, everything can be not blatantly misogynistic. And you have to work if you want things not to be blatantly misogynistic, because we live in patriarchy. We live in patriarchy, and some of us have known that since, like, before Barbie, and just don't understand why we're pretending like it's not real just because we hate these women. Why we're pretending like it's fine to sexualize and ignore the boundaries and, like, stated intentions of what somebody is trying to do just because they are a woman that we don't like. Bethany is a bully too, but that does not and cannot justify misogyny as a response to it. Because, look, you are asking fundamentalist women, because I do actually kind of believe that Bethany doesn't lurk the subreddit. I mean, she might if it were less of a cruel place, but I mean, it's fine that there's a place that's not for the person being discussed necessarily to be, like, looking. But again, not only does it block her off from actually accepting criticism, it also, like, you are presenting this sexual... You're, like, presenting this sexual... You're, like, presenting this sexual... Why can't I say secular? You're, like, presenting this secular world as an option, but in that world, the woman would still have to deal with, misogyny and being referred to in ways that are misogynistic. But by leaving the church, leaving the gender roles that they have foisted upon them since childhood, and get rushed into recreating with another generation of children, you have to opt out of a brand of misogyny that is similar, but at least offers you some form of false protection. These women don't play into their expected gender roles because they're stupid or weak. It's because it is the way that they're told that being an adult is. It's the path that they are given, and it's not a path that has a lot of quirks in it. It's just what you do. So if your options are be here where people are being sexist to you, but at least you don't have to, but at least you're not completely on your own, and at least you don't have to maybe work outside of the house, or leave all of that behind and also your safety, and people still are going to be devaluing you because you are not a virgin. Why is that what we're presenting as what the secular world is like? I don't give a shit if somebody has had sex or not. It doesn't actually change anything about their coloring, complexion, outlook, value, worth. It doesn't. Like, it's a thing that people sometimes do with each other. And all that it means if you lost your virginity is that you did a new thing with somebody else that you hadn't yet done. You can assign whatever you want to that, especially if you really love the person who you were with. But you are perpetuating misogyny if you assign that to another woman. There's not a way around it. There's not a cutesy way to do it and get away with it. There's not a woman who is not impacted by misogyny who is a safe target to apply that to. You are just doing misogyny. You're being a misogynist. You're not snarking. You're not deconstructing. You're not being an ally to people who do deconstruct. You are doing misogyny to a woman because you don't like her. SHANSPEARE lays out the whole fake protection that is offered to trad wives really beautifully in their videos about the subject, which I will link in the description below, and you should definitely watch. But that's nuance that is just not applied in Fundie Snark Uncensored. And I think part of why it is not applied in Fundie Snark Uncensored is because, as probably evidenced by the uncensored part, this was originally, I think, a splinter group of r/Fundie Snark, which has gone private as of a couple of years ago. So Fundie Snark had no leg humping rules, which similar to the whole don't poop touch, where it's you couldn't think of a different word. But that was don't praise the fundies too much. So this was supposed to be the Reddit where you could go if you wanted to not get in trouble if you said that somebody's wedding dress was pretty or something, I believe. I genuinely could be wrong about this. This is not me laying out the entire history of Fundie Snark, but that's just what I understand from what I've seen. But that thought to me of you're offering people just more misogyny and no benefit. You're not welcoming them into questioning things about themselves. You are humiliating them for not having already done it. You're doing that Judge Judy tapping the watch gif at them, and it's just weird. It's really where I just kind of started kicking off thinking about all of this. The ethics of it, of making a fandom out of your hatred of a woman who is indoctrinated into something. Posting breathlessly, excited to know what their family has posted, people who aren't even involved in the ministry. Trading around screenshots of people's Instagram stories and having opinions about their children who they post and don't allow much privacy. Because again, ministry is one of the very few options that are available to stay-at-home stay-at-home Fundie mothers, and they want to do social media and be able to get money for it so that they don't have to leave all of the kids that they had. And once they cross over from, just mentoring other women to trying to do a full-on social media ministry or influencer thing or whatever, and they start getting sponsorships, often those sponsors will be, I think, completely fairly alerted to the kind of things that these people espouse on their platforms and pull out. Now, I have never personally contacted a sponsor. It's not work that I participate in when I see it. I think it's fine, though. I think if you're comfortable yelling transphobic things on your platform, the sponsors giving you money to try to make you sell things for them deserve to know that and maybe not be comfortable with being aligned with it. But it does contribute to the persecution complex that a lot of these people feel, which just makes them double down further and further into this like system, these roles that they're playing, because one of the roles is being persecuted. Like, I don't genuinely think that Fundie Snark is persecution, and certainly not the way that some of these fundies frame it, but also thinking about the force of having that many people hate you so much does make my head spin a little bit. Like, feeling the full force of that, having them come onto your private accounts because they don't follow the don't touch the poop rule. There was actually a troll account that was made after She Works Smart that was like She Works Fart, and they were just making a bunch of like poop and shit jokes, like using similar branding to what Bethany did, like literally just to get a rise out of her. And it's like, again, Christians in general as like a category are people who are in big positions of power, but like a lot of the fundamentalists, even more so than Bethany, but I think definitely including Bethany, are not wealthy people. Like, these are just middle class families who are presenting as if they're more. And, you know, maybe that is kind of what you get when you're selling this illusion of yourself as big and successful, that people want to knock you down. But I still don't think that it justifies some of the level of bullying that we see. Like, almost every single fundie that I'm aware of rents. They don't like own big lavish houses. They're in houses. They're being like picked at for that on Fundie Snark. They're saying, "Oh, look, they're selling their things because they can't afford their house payment." And it's like, that doesn't make me feel bad about people getting sponsors to pull out or anything, but it does kind of just make me remember, like, oh yeah, these are just people. Like, these are normal people. I don't know. I just think that there is this gap because you're so used to snarking on like celebrities or like people who are like really, really rich influencers. And I'm sure that whatever amount of money that Bethany has like grifted from her course on courses and stuff is like too much. But also, she's not Dave Ramsey. She gets criticized like she's Dave Ramsey, and it's just like she's or Joyce Myers or Gwen Shamblin or something. And it just sometimes frustrates me because, especially as we'll see when we move into the nuance corner soon, we know that her husband has been a lot more willing to like accept criticism and look to grow based on things that are said about him online. And it's because the tone of those things is completely different, because it's not misogynistic. And I'm not saying that people are sitting down and logging on to r/FSU and being like, I'm going to be a misogynist. I'm saying once you find a target that you feel is acceptable, all of the internalized bullshit that you have been pushing away sometimes when you've been trying to unlearn patriarchy just all comes out onto the first person that you think it's allowed to go on to, even though that's not really how misogyny works. You know, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, I was kind of frustrated with the rise of this conversation of like, oh, well, there's always rich white women who are going to be able to get abortions. Because while, yes, wealthy people, and especially wealthy white people, will have more access to any kind of privilege, there's not like a secret Planned Parenthood where the wives of senators go sip margaritas and get DNCs. Like, that's not real. And people just kind of tell you that it is real and tell each other and themselves that it's real because they find it easier to get mad about the wrong things than at the hopelessness of the fact that, like, yeah, no, even a lot of those people's wives and mistresses are fucked. They just don't get child support for the baby. That's like off topic, but I just want to be clear that this empathy that I'm extending to Bethany, I'm extending to her because I'm a woman, so it's the same empathy that I extend to those hypothetical Republican mistresses or whatever, not because I like Bethany. I feel like I've been clear enough about that by now, but just making sure. So it does feel important for reasons I have sort of talked about earlier in this video that I bring people who have been complaining about Bethany, even in ways that I don't like, to the nuance corner sooner than I particularly take up for Bethany any more than I already have by reminding you of what her circumstances are in terms of how she and I were both kind of raised. And just to head off the comments, I'm sure I am to an extent over-identifying with her. I don't necessarily hold it against people who don't feel that level of, it is somewhat pity, but a sympathetic pity, a pity for the fact that it's essentially me in an alternate universe. It's, which is probably me over-identifying myself into the situation, but it just still feels worth a conversation. Anyway, even the people who engage in it in ways that I don't necessarily like, as I've said before, do have a right to be critical of something that kind of acts as a mouthpiece for structures that are in place. But I just don't think that, especially the women espousing purity culture, no matter how harmful the fact that they do it is, it didn't start with them. Usually their father gave them a purity ring and was like, I'm giving you this ring and you have to be a virgin until you get married because I own you. And we're not really tracing it back far enough when we get frustrated. I think sometimes, of course, in a perfect world, this whole don't kiss before you're married thing wouldn't be something that people were pushing. I don't think that's good relationship advice. I think you should kiss before you're married. But also, it's personal. It's a personal thing. And if Bethany truly was just this is my own personal experience, but because she was girl defined, she was one of the girls who was defining herself as being trying to walk the most perfect godly way, she was putting that forward as if it was the only option. And people who were presented that as the only option have the right to be frustrated with people who were giving them that shitty of an option. But those people were also given a shitty option. So even the people who I just kind of did say are perpetuating misogyny, you can do that without bad intentions. We do it without bad intentions all the time. Being a feminist doesn't mean that nothing that we do ever perpetuates misogyny. It just means that we have a responsibility to correct it when we see it in ourselves. One thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking ethics of snarking on Girl Defined, I know at least one YouTuber paid for access to a private small group thing that she was running. And I feel incredibly differently about somebody paying for the pre-recorded courses that she put out there and doing a review of those. I think that's fine, especially if it discourages other people from paying for the same thing, if it's just more gawking, right? But to enter into a small group under false pretenses, especially to the extent where you have to cover the fact that you are who you are in the Zoom portion of it, I don't think that that's a justified criticism to be making of a woman so much as it is maybe not examining the fact that you are not only inserting yourself into a place that is supposed to be for Christian women, and specifically single Christian women. She did try to set out the audience that she wanted to be talking to in this. And I don't know if this was just a misunderstanding, again, why I wanted to lay out what my non-denominational understanding of some of these Fundie words are, of maybe that YouTuber did think that they were paying for something that was pre-recorded because other people have covered the pre-recorded things. But by talking about something that's harmful when you're not the one who's most directly harmed by it, when you're not a single Christian woman, which is who she was trying to target with that. And even if you're very, very careful and you're not sharing things that were said by other people in that group, the other people's consent that they had in that group is now voided because they didn't have full information about what they were consenting to. They thought that they were not in the same space as somebody who was making content. And I'm not trying to put this creator on blast. I like a lot of their other videos. I just think that this was both a misstep and a misstep that was bound to happen with the way that these people get covered. And, even in the big Trixie Mattel reaction, there's a moment where the girls are talking about their father being like, this is not the language that the girls defined use. I'm using this language. The girls are talking about their father being controlling about the makeup that they wear. And Trixie's response is one of surprise. And I'm not like, this isn't like a Trixie Mattel call out moment either, but Trixie seems surprised by that and is like, well, how bad is the makeup that they were doing if their dad was being involved? And it's like, no, that's the point. The point is that no matter what kind of makeup they were doing, their father was in charge of it because their father was in charge of them. Their father owned them until they got married, and then their husband was expected to own them from then on. So it's like, I understand. I don't think that most of these things that are being said are like inherently a misunderstanding exactly, but I think that they're not fully informed of the context. And, that's especially bound to happen with drag. For somebody who is being gender non-conforming with their makeup, there can be a lot more joy in it than for somebody who has been expected to wear makeup and to only wear a specific amount and type of makeup that doesn't make them look like they're wearing makeup, because they can't be a stumbling block, but they do need to be presenting femininity and will be accused of not trying if they're not wearing makeup, most likely. I was only allowed to leave the house to go to church, and I had to wear makeup to church pretty much from when I started wearing makeup. Once I broke that steal and started performing femininity that way, it was a requirement. I would be told you have to go finish getting ready if I wanted to not wear makeup. And that's weird. That impacted my relationship with makeup and my ability to find fun in putting colors on my eyes and face. But I so understand why, if you weren't raised exactly that way, your immediate reaction would be like, damn, why is it any of the dad's business? Because it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the dad's business. And I'm far from the only person to even have ruminations on the ethics of these things. I mean, Jen, Fundie Fridays, she's one of the most popular, if not the single most popular YouTuber who covers these things. And she has had an entire journey that has been documented through her Jill Rodriguez specials about how she feels about snarking on somebody who doesn't have a massive platform, who didn't have a TV show, who has a bunch of kids who are probably being mistreated, and how it seems to make her feel gross. Honestly, I think to be open about that is really brave, especially when the Jill Rodriguez Halloween special was such a part of the Fundie Fridays brand. I don't know. I do think that takes integrity, and Jen is really not perpetuating what I'm talking about when I'm saying that I'm seeing these behaviors that I don't like in the Fundie Snark community. Jen is not included in these behaviors that I'm summarizing. This video is not I think Jen Fundie Fridays has a bad YouTube channel and I'm mad that Rachel Oates talks about Girl Defined. It's not. I think both of those people come at things from different angles and provide useful commentary. I'm just talking more about the general concept of snark as something more cerebral, not necessarily just these specific nitpicks. I'm talking about is there maybe a way to do this where somebody who is being criticized like Bethany is, when Bethany talks about her sex life with her husband and is being told by people who are more conservative in their Christianity than her to shut up, we see her double down on that. Like I said, she likes to pick fights. She'll post more reels of her talking about having sex with her husband or whatever. She'll post more reels and Instagram stories and stuff about her courses or her time with her husband, or whatever. But she definitely is getting pushed away from the Christian influencer space. She is, in a way, already deconstructing. And she's not getting credit for that because on the subreddit, it's more like, well, she's being annoying. She's talking too much about her sex life. Nobody cares. Slash, wow, Bethany, I can't believe it like took you a while to learn that. Slash, why would anybody need to know about that? Because I was born knowing about it and I have amazing sex with my husband all the time. And it kind of feels to me like sour grapes, like this idea in the snarkers that they maybe haven't examined where it's like frustrated almost that even like a fundamentalist person can enjoy having sex because that was supposed to be like one of your things, one of your rewards for not being in that cult, and they shouldn't get to have it both ways. Again, the same as I don't think that they're like twirling their thumbs and saying, oh, I'm going to make a misogynistic post. Like, I think that's truly something that is not examined. But like, what level of Fundie Snark comes from an inherent feeling of superiority? And why are we wielding that superiority against women the way that we do a lot more than we do against men? Are there just less male Fundie influencers who aren't part of a couple? That might be the case, but I almost struggle to believe that it is. Is it that those people just get like included in alpha male snark, so they're being talked about otherwise? Because that also feels different. Like, I'm not really sure where we go from here once we identify that we have an issue with the way that some of this language is used about people. And maybe I'm over reading into this, and maybe I'm being more sensitive about this than is justified. You know, maybe I'm just not cut out for like knowing what a snark subreddit is and not having my feelings hurt. But I feel like we can do better than this. And I feel like if we do better than this, we provide a better example for people to be able to do themselves someday. Somebody else who I really enjoy watching talk about Girl Defined and other Christian influencers is HANEY. And I know from watching HANEY's recent videos about the Paul and Morgan 24 Hours With challenge that they did with Bethany, during which, if you're not already aware, Paul kept like challenging Dave on his Christianity, and though during the video they had kind of implied that Dave was still a Christian, after the fact Paul kind of slipped a little, well, if you asked Dave, he might not tell you he's a Christian, in the comment section. So there was like wild speculation, and then Bethany and Dave recorded a response video and talked a lot and I think shared really generously about their experience with Dave deconstructing and the kind of things that he's been pushing aside and not letting himself feel or examine. And like, she loves this guy. I watched that HANEY video with my friend because I don't directly even watch Girl Defined videos. And we just kept being like, well, yeah, like, of course, once she started kind of deconstructing things for herself, she got really excited about trying to help and mentor other Christian women about, like, how to have a closer, intimate relationship. Like, I understand people's discomfort with that, and I especially understand feeling like it's huge whiplash compared to the whole modesty, extra shirts under the shirt thing. But, like, that is helpful information for people to have. I would rather fundamentalist women have somebody telling them that they're not supposed to be in pain when they have sex. I don't think all or even most of the information that Bethany is providing is good. I think that the fact that she had somebody in her intercourse that like did not understand female anatomy and needed to have it pointed out on their own baby is like horrific, and she still sells that course with that in there even though it's been highly criticized. And I can't get behind that. Like, I don't like the monetization of this, but I think as, you know, just if this wasn't a grift, if this wasn't part of selling the course, and I do think that selling the course comes from that being the way to make money and do what she's like supposed to do in the way that she's been raised, I wouldn't be against a Christian woman perpetuating the idea that sex can be fun and feel good, and also that in order for sex to be fun and feel good for women, it often takes a lot of time for them to kind of warm themselves up. If that's not information that's given to you, it's not information that you can possibly know. If you have a mom who doesn't want you to meet people who aren't Christians or like know how sex works, you get to just not meet people who aren't Christians and not know how sex works. I would so much rather every Christian woman and every woman and every person on the planet know that sex is supposed to feel good, that sex is supposed to be an embodiment of something that feels good. Like, that is the bare minimum entry level what sex is. There are other things sex can be for, but like standard, typically, sex should feel good. That should be something that you are expecting out of sex. A lot of fundamentalist rhetoric, including, like I said earlier, Lori Alexander. People will be anti things that just genuinely feel like it's because they're into women being tortured, like telling women not to use lube. There's not even any reasoning for that. It's just being mean. And if people are being mean on both sides, there's just truly nowhere for these people to go, right? So I think Bethany is doing good in this one way, and she's probably doing good in other ways that I'm not seeing. But like, even just this one way, and the fact that she's doing that in spite of pushback, and that she's like staying with her husband as he's like deconstructing, you know, there's hope for her. But the hope is like significantly dampened the more people are weird to her, because that's just going to convince her of what the people who don't want her to do what her husband is doing are trying to like scare her out of deconstructing. And I can't make the like leave Bethany alone and let her deal with it privately argument when she wants to do it publicly. And on some level, especially with Dave, I do think it is brave to do that publicly. I just wish that she could be criticized in a way that wouldn't make our side of things, as it were, look so much worse than what she has the rose-colored glasses on of her side of things. So I've already mentioned it, but the like KODY Co video about Girl Defined, that was several years ago at this point, really towards the beginning of like commentary YouTube as a genre. And I watch a lot of commentary YouTube, clearly, but I think there's been a lot more thought put recently into kind of what people who have big platforms lead their followers to kind of laugh at. You know, most people who I follow who are still creating even lighthearted commentary video essays are usually increasingly careful as their platform grows with highlighting somebody in a look at this cool thing this person is doing kind of way, or laughing with somebody who is clearly doing a bit, you know. But like, if I were to see that as a Christian woman, even if I weren't specifically the Christian women who were being screen recorded and laughed at, because sure, whatever, at some point, if you put something up on YouTube, people just can do that, especially when it's prescriptive modesty and dating advice. But also, like in the case of the course that Bethany Beal was offering, it was advice that they were like trying to give to specifically Christian women. So they were trying to make all of these points of like, oh, these might be men that you don't want to marry, like Mr. Do Nothing, Mr. Whatever. And they were being laughed at and mocked for that on like this massive scale. Again, I mean, whatever. But like, these are two men who are not like in this religion, amplifying them laughing at two women who are part of a religion that they're not part of. And while Christians aren't persecuted, women are. And the existence of like some of the dating standards that get clowned on are like, well, yeah, but it's still okay to like not want to date every man. And that's another thing that I think is just so unconscious, like not a criticism that I would directly give. I'm sure that it wasn't an intentional, like, oh, let's shoot down this woman for mentioning that women might have standards in dating men, but again, despite me disagreeing with how they go about their platform, just as I appreciate that somebody might be willing to tell Christian women that they can enjoy sex, I appreciate somebody telling stay-at-home daughters that they don't have to marry the first man who proposes to them. I think all of this language of like wait around and see for like the person that God chose for you is still difficult, because your parents can just tell you that whatever man they signed off on is the one God chose for you. But there is at least like some level of autonomy that was already being hinted at in early Girl Defined, even though they were very much subscribing to the whole umbrellas of authority thing that we see in the teachings of Bill Gothard. And we're not just acting as if they were underneath the headship of their father, but also that every other unmarried woman by default was, right? Like, again, I'm just trusting you at this point that you know that we're like taking all of this with nuance, right? Anyway, again, in that Paul and Morgan 24 hours with video, Paul brings it up to Bethany. He says, like, oh, there are reaction videos of you that have millions of views. And that's like almost certainly the one that he's talking about. I think HANEY also said that in her reaction video, which like that video got so many views, not just because of Girl Defined, but because of like Kody's YouTube channel, the fact that people watch his videos to laugh and have a good time and watch people clowning on things. So that's not really like a fair thing. That's something that's being included into the persecution complex, but it still is a huge amount of attention to have on people from something that you made when you were young. A lot of their early videos aren't up anymore, and I think Bethany is so entrenched in all of this. In that video, she says that she doesn't intend on apologizing and that she's frustrated that people ask her and her sister for an apology, because what good would an apology do? But they do kind of backtrack on their once strict rules on modesty. And a lot of people are really quick to say that it's hypocritical, and it is when it was once part of your platform, but they have been removing videos that they no longer agree with. And while I do wish that they could just say, hey, I'm sorry, I know that that sucked, I just think that if we're being rational about the way that human beings behave, like, expecting that of her while she's still actively identifying as a Christian and while she is still bucking up against the idea that she would deconstruct, even though her husband does identify as being in the process of deconstruction, it's just not a reasonable expectation to have. And it's not an expectation that we would have if we weren't like putting her on this weird hate pedestal. I just think the fact that like Dave, a man who, you know, again, I haven't directly watched the videos. This is from things that I've seen in other people's coverage, but like he cuts down his wife. Again, like I said, Bethany has struggled with infertility issues and really struggled to conceive. And in this Paul and Morgan video, when she's like doing an interview, she says, you know, I've been through some hard things. And he like immediately cut her down and was like, oh, what? Like you had a hard time finding a parking spot? And that is so much like how people on the internet talk about her. And then they had a whole conversation about what Paul and Morgan refer to as the haters. And Bethany was a lot more open to the idea of the haters as a cogent category because she sees that. And Dave was like, well, I just think it's people who criticize us to different extents. And it does seem like, you know, I've said earlier, he's willing to try to take some of that criticism on. I know he talked in the video about how somebody said that they thought that he seemed narcissistic and that he was like, felt very affronted by that. Not in a way where he thought that it wasn't true, but like he really had to examine himself and wanted to like change the way that he treats his wife or whatever. But it's just like Bethany gets more shit for like maybe not keeping her house as clean as people on the snark boards think that she should than he does for like actively cutting his wife down and invalidating her, you know? And People are very quick to talk about when Paul of Paul and Morgan is a dick to Morgan, which happens all the time. I don't like these people either. And I think it's really kind of the same thing a little bit, that they felt so persecuted by having their own shit said in Shiny Happy People. Like, they were mad and felt like they were taken out of context. But if you are going to scream transphobic things on your couch and then you say, yeah, you can put things from our channel in the documentary, they might put the transphobic things in the documentary. People might send that to your sponsor. Like, that is a consequence. I don't think that misogyny should be a consequence, because I think that misogyny being a consequence hurts not just the women who are being misogynized too, but also it hurts other women who see it. It hurts women who begin to internalize and reperpetuate it. It hurts our idea of what's a normal way to refer to a woman. We start using nicknames like Birthy without really thinking about it, or with thinking, well, the joke is that she is bragging that she's able to conceive and her sister was not, or whatever. And like, probably people who are snarking on fundamentalists are more willing to re-examine things about themselves than the Fundies are, which is another reason that I'm like, I could be going in harder on the Fundies. I just don't think that that is helpful to people who were in cults, or, you know, people who haven't yet realized that the way that their religion was used to control them in their youth was traumatizing to them. I don't even think specifically just the church that I went to itself was traumatizing. It was a lot of different churches that I went to, right? Like, I got confirmed Lutheran. I spent time in a lot of different youth groups and a lot of different churches. And the majority of my trauma came from like the way that I was being homeschooled, the way that the homeschool was incorporating the Bible curriculum, and the way that even having internal thoughts in my brain that were doubtful was like punished like it was an act of disobedience. Like, it would make my mother angry at you, so you wouldn't phrase it, you wouldn't verbalize it, you would like be afraid that even thinking it was a sin. Being raised like that is a level of control that is just, I think, not often discussed. I'm not even claiming that my experience of it was the worst that there is. I know that it wasn't. I even make school of the dining room table jokes about myself, but it's not a joke that I would make about other people, and it's just a joke that I think comes across differently when it's not coming from somebody who went to the school of the dining room table. Like, jokes that homeschoolers laugh at about themselves exist. They're just not often the same jokes that the mainstream people want to make about them, because often homeschool mainstream jokes are child abuse jokes. And any abused child only wants to laugh at a joke about it that's been told and peer-reviewed by other abused children, not by people who didn't experience that. Like, if your joke is just, did you ever notice homeschoolers are weird, unsocialized freaks? That's when you get the reputation of like the homeschoolers being really defensive. If you say like, you know, homeschoolers tuck their shirts into their pants, usually you'll get a laugh from at least some of them. I mentioned this earlier, but I think another reason that I just feel like the boards should at least attempt to be constructive is that no matter whether or not they are a place that is intentionally for the fundies to come to, it is a place that they end up coming as they deconstruct. Not just in my case, but in the case of somebody I mentioned earlier in this video, the older brother of the girls defined. Their brother has shared his story on Reddit. He did an AMA. He talked about a lot of things, including the fact that, you know, pretty much the point I'm making in this video, they are the way that they are because their mother is the way that she is. And he suffered extensive abuse at the hands of his mother and other people while his mother allowed it. the mom doesn't like that he is, you know, in secular therapy about this. She doesn't want to try to solve this through therapy. She wants to try to solve it through Jesus, the way she's already tried and failed to solve it. And between that, which we know about because, like, the survivor himself came to the forum and told us, it's not speculation of me to say Heidi was abusive to her son. It's me repeating what her son said. But then we get a lot of, you know, second and third hand things. We get snarkers who are screen capping Heidi's Instagram stories and Facebook reels and saying, do you think this is about Bethany? Do you think that she is mad at Bethany for having a husband who's deconstructing? And that just, to me, feels like if it's real and it's being speculated on, it would make how it feels that it's happening worse. Speaking as somebody with a mother who has made passive-aggressive Instagram posts. And if it's not real, it's like stoking something that would make even somebody perfectly rational begin to feel paranoid that they were being vague tweeted about. Even though, like, in terms of actual Christian doctrine, it maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to say that Heidi would be trying to pressure her daughter into getting a divorce. It's very backed up in scripture that, like, a Christian wife who is married to a non-believer would just, like, continue to be married to that non-believer and try to witness to him, which seems to be what she and Dave are both doing to each other. And again, just not something that I think a peanut gallery about is helpful. So I'm gonna stop speculating about it here. I guess I just don't know to what extent these people are, you know, asking for it and to what extent we can ask for better. To what extent it's not so much about policing each other as about policing ourselves, but like sometimes you do have to moderate that shit when somebody doesn't think about the implications of what they're saying. I would so much rather have somebody tell me if something that I say comes across the wrong way than to like paint an inaccurate picture of myself and what I believe, you know? And I think a lot of the people on the subreddit who are deconstructioners assume that everybody there is also a deconstructioner, but a lot of people are there because they don't like Christians and they want to laugh at them. And while they'll like put up a facade of being nice and friendly to you because you've already deconstructed, like if you're a few steps behind in the process, that's not a place where you're going to get any grace. Which is why I just don't like the increasing conflation of deconstruction with snark, because they are two fundamentally different things. People who are like seriously talking about deconstruction in spaces like, you know, recovering grace, or people who are otherwise discussing the harmful beliefs of the IBLP and other forms of fundamentalist Christianity and religious abuse, especially when it comes to homeschooling. You know, like they are different things, but increasingly I think snark wants to be able to be bullying and also still be deconstruction. And it can't be all of those things. We can't be everything. We can just be better than being cruel to women in ways we wouldn't be cruel to men, I think. Do you? That's it. That's the video. I decided that the best way to not like be a drama channel when I want to talk about things like this is to not be a drama channel when I talk about things like this. So I decided not to go digging for clips and do a bunch of like catchy visuals and stuff. I think Nuance Corner videos are going to be like this. I hope you like them. I really like making them. I really like hearing what people think in the comments. I love knowing that these things that my brain kind of turns over and over is not just my brain. I've already got a couple of ideas of people who I want to bring to the Nuance Corner next, but if you have anybody that you would like to hear a, you know, balanced but still biased take about, I would love to know. I would love to make that kind of video. definitely please let me know in the comments below, or, you know, anytime I'm asking a question, it's genuinely not rhetorical. I love hearing what people think. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss our next trip to the Nuance Corner or my next lesbian video, which I'm going to be putting together for Lesbian Day of Visibility in this coming month, please make sure to subscribe. We're very close to 500, which I'm very, very excited about. At 500, I guess I'm allowed to offer like channel memberships. That's going to be the same videos that I offer on my Patreon, which is officially launched. You can find it in the description below. On my Patreon, you can find videos that are somehow even more rambly than this one. That's a really great way to support me and what I'm doing and my general survival and ability to continue to make videos. There are different tier levels, so if you just want pictures of my cat and documents that I have from filming, you can sign up for free. If you are not interested in getting extra videos from me, but you feel like you would like to kick me a few dollars, there's options for that. And then, as I said before, there are options to get extra videos and to vote on what the topic of those extra videos will be, all at different tiers that you can find on the Patreon. Thank you so, so much to everybody who has already supported me on Patreon and by sharing and liking and commenting on my videos here on YouTube so far. I wish that there was a girl-defined tutorial on how to end a YouTube video in a God-honoring way.